A massacre in the honeycombs.
There were dead bees all over the front of the hive, all over the bottom board, and they all had all been chopped to bits. They were decapitated.
Beekeeper Ted McFall says he went to check on a hive one morning in November and found an entire colony destroyed. 60,000 honeybees torn apart in a savage attack. About a month later, the alleged attacker was revealed. This Asian giant hornet found in Blaine, Washington, just a couple miles from McFall's property.
And all it takes is a couple dozen of the Asian giant hornets to show up and start lopping off heads.
Dubbed the murder hornet for its powerful sting and the way it decapitates its prey, this is the first time the world's largest hornet has been seen in the U.S. In its native Asia, Vespa mandarinia is notorious, seen on programs like Netflix's 72 Dangerous Animals. Washington State entomologist Chris Looney says the clock is ticking.
The goal is to eradicate it now while the population is presumably small.
If he and his colleagues can't wipe out the invaders this summer, they're likely to multiply and spread across the country with potentially disastrous consequences. They're counting on the public to help trap and track hornets back to their nests.
They have a 1-year life cycle, and so every year we can keep a nest from reproducing, then we win.
The hornets also pose a threat to humans. Adventurer and YouTube personality Coyote Peterson tracked one down in Japan to demonstrate how painful their sting can be.
Searing pain!
A few dozen stings can be fatal. Asian giant hornets kill around 30 to 50 people a year, and while Japanese bees have evolved to create self-defense systems, North American bees have no idea how to fight an alien predator like this. Bee Lives Matter experts say not just for honey, but the entire food system.
The pollination that honeybees do for our food supply cannot be understated. I mean, there's so many fruits and vegetables that are dependent on honeybees.
In other words, a threat to the bee is a threat to you and me. For Today, Joe Fryer, NBC News, Los Angeles.
That's right, folks. We have murder wasps. Bees that literally, or wasps that literally can kill you. Wow, how convenient that this is coming out at a time where they're really trying to get people to self-quarantine and stay inside at all times. Now, do you think it's a coincidence that something like this would just pop up? What do you think, that the air, somebody farted in the air and, a bird took a dump and all of a sudden murder wasps were just on their way to the United States of America? Wow, how convenient. Oh, right, I forgot. There's this place called Plum Island, which is now in Kansas. And I shouldn't even call it Plum Island anymore, because Plum Island is now doing basic research, what we're told, basic research on, power grids going down and things like that. They've moved the Center for Disease Control to Kansas, where, people are growing cattle and farming and doing, the basic source for most of our food comes in the Midwest. They decided to move it there. Boy, must be a huge coincidence, right? Don't forget, this is a specific place where they do testing on animals. No, they don't put rats in a cage and put a piece of cheese at the end. They do things like what you're seeing on the screen to animals. They mutate them. They put diseases in them. They see if they could do things like create Lyme's disease, which is exactly what our government has done. They put diseases in things like ticks, which can go and bite you and make you sick because they create the disease and they put it inside of the bug or whatever you want to call it that bites you, mosquitoes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? We've heard this for decades about, oh my goodness, there's going to be an outbreak and mosquitoes are going to spread it and all this stuff. Now we have the killer wasp on the loose in Washington State. And this is just going to the stories are going to get funnier as it goes on, right? The Asian giant hornet is what they're calling it, also known as the murder hornet. It grows up to 2 inches in length, and they've now been spotted in the Pacific Northwest. They were first found on Vancouver Island in 2019. They're attempting to develop tracking measures to actively track people who might be in the area where they're nesting. now. So this is another way to track people. I have no idea. But the Asian giant hornet, they said, didn't get the nickname murder hornet just from decimating entire honeybee colonies. So obviously, as you've heard, they're killing other bees. And they're also, if they sting you multiple times, like, what is the movie? The scene from, what's the kid? The kid I've covered multiple times. Macaulay Culkin, right? With the Pizzagate stuff. In My Girl, right? He just gets stung by the bees and gets killed. It's coming to fruition, apparently. But they say they didn't get the nickname murder hornet just from decimating honeybee colonies. It's known to kill roughly 30 people a year in Japan due to the powerful sting. So let me guess, what's going to be next? Is this going to spread, and then we're going to hear all of the alt-right people talk about how this is another bioweapon sent from Japan, from China? I mean, give me a break. Really? This stuff only pops up if they want it to pop up. And look, you can look at this and you could say, I don't believe it, it's not real. Completely understandable. Completely understandable. I mean, I haven't seen a murder wasp before. I've been stung by a wasp before. Ain't fun. Can't imagine getting stung by a murder wasp. But if this is true, okay, if it's true, let's look at it from that perspective. And this is happening. You shouldn't look at it and go, wow. I know that there's some Christians who will say, well, this is God's way of, biblical prophecy being fulfilled. I get that. But you have to understand, they create and mutate all the time. I mean, we see it in predictive programming. Even like the new Jurassic Park movies have, mutated dinosaurs that swim and are also T-Rex. I mean, it's a joke. It's laughable because this is what the Center of Disease Control does. They mutate all of these insects, all of the animals they could possibly get their hands on. This is what they do to them. They try to inject them with this, they inject them with that. The same thing they did to humans too in the 50s and 60s with MK Ultra and all the testing that they did on human bodies with twins. I mean, just disturbing stuff I'm sure you've heard of with Operation Paperclip and other things like that I've covered on this channel. But now we have these things popping up, and if you believe that it's real, which again you don't have to, but hypothetically, if it is, understand that they're the ones who mutated. It just didn't pop up out of nowhere, okay? And it wasn't sent here from China. Some guy didn't fly in from Japan or from China, land in Washington State, and release a bunch of murder wasps, okay? They release it. They create it. They do it. They mutate. That's what these sick you-know-whats do. They love this type of stuff. So we now have the murder wasp on the loose. And again, if you're not familiar with Plum Island, you should become familiar with it. Because even if they deflect and they talk about it like, no, there's conspiracy surrounding Plum Island and the Center for Disease Control, and we never did anything wrong, and they're good people, and they're just doctors, and scientists doing research, developing new vaccines and all this other stuff to save us. Give me a break. They're developing things to make us sick, to create airborne, diseases like Lyme's disease through ticks. This is stuff that they openly have been caught doing, and still, nobody in America seems to care. It's a total, utter joke.
Straight out of the pages of science fiction, militarized ticks ready to kill. Not like this, riding missiles into the air, but with diseases like Lyme disease. The theory is scientists during the Cold War ran experiments on ticks and other insects to create biological weapons. And somehow those bugs got out, either released on purpose or by accident, which is why some believe we're seeing a big uptick in Lyme disease. In the last 20 years, the CDC says Lyme disease cases have gone up by nearly 300%.
With that big of an increase, it makes sense that people would try to come up with unique ways to explain that.
Right. I think it's just a conspiracy theory. I don't really see it as reality.
Janet Jarnefeld is the tick expert at the Metropolitan Mosquito Control District. She spent the last 30 years studying ticks and says this idea of turning them into weapons is hard to believe.
It doesn't make any sense to me that somebody from the military would be wanting to experiment on a creature that moves so slowly.
And she wonders why Lyme disease, which isn't exactly deadly, it can lead to a lot of problems, but if you're designing a tiny killing machine, she feels there are better options out there.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
For better options, just look at history. During World War II, scientists had all sorts of crazy ideas involving animals. One of them, the bat bomb. The idea was to strap tiny explosives on a bunch of bats and drop them on the enemy. Those bats would then settle into people's attics and would eventually explode, causing panic and fires everywhere. The idea backfired during an experiment when a stray bat burned down a hangar at the base, and the idea was ultimately scrapped. Scientists also created a pigeon-guided missile. That's right, you heard me correctly. So the idea of weaponized ticks isn't as crazy as you'd think, especially not to the author of this book, Bitten, The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons, written by Stanford University science writer Chris Newby, who also directed a documentary on Lyme disease. Another believer, U.S. Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey, who led the charge earlier this month to get the Department of Defense to look back into its archives and find any proof of these experiments. Congress actually approved the idea, so now we wait to see what they find out.
Will you be interested in finding out what they do uncover?
I will be very interested, and I don't know what's going to happen. I guess that's kind of the fun of science too. If I get a new fact that's going to make me change my viewpoint on it, then I would change it. But for now, I don't suspect that's going to happen.
I reached out to the author of the book and the congressman who's leading the charge, but I haven't heard back from them at this time. I also reached out to the Minnesota Department of Health's tick experts, and they don't want to comment on it. And it's just a really interesting story. But the person who wrote the book actually claims to have a person who worked on this project for the Pentagon, and they were quoted in the book extensively. So there is a little bit of possible truth to this.
Less than 100 miles from New York City is Plum Island Lab. Here, the U.S. government conducts top-secret biological experiments. Most Americans are unaware of the facility, but it has been linked to an Al-Qaeda plot and an alarming past tied to Nazi scientists. Military technology expert John Gresham has been denied access to the island. Now he decides to view the lab from the air. Once airborne, it takes less than 2 minutes by helicopter to get from the tip of Long Island to Plum Island. Along the south side of the island are the abandoned ruins of the original lab run by the Nazi scientists. It now appears to be crumbling at the hands of the elements.
It's interesting how the government just abandons the things they don't really want, but the stuff they do want to take care of, they really take good care of.
Then they approach the main lab. There, John can see the measures that the government has taken to keep the facility secure.
Well, you can see how much they've expanded since 1950. It's a very large receiving and storage facility over here, which they're clearly using very actively.
John is left wondering if Plum Island is really the best place to keep a potentially dangerous facility. Back on the ground, John analyzes the video he shot.
This is a vulnerable island. It needs to be looked at and perhaps the facility moved.
The government does plan to move the bioresearch lab to a new facility that would be built in Kansas, but the plan has been stalled.
In so many ways, this is not a facility that folks in this densely populated part of America should be forced to live next to.
For now, Plum Island will remain open indefinitely. The danger of exposure to locals remains unchanged.